I'll start with progression and its new features, then I'll give feedback as I go. I had the full intention of making this video a partial guide as well, but I'll make something of that nature hopefully in the coming weeks, depending on the direction of development. But we'll get into that as I go over what the progression cycle's been like and where they can improve. If you haven't played since Season 4 or earlier, a lot has changed. There's no more tablets, frags are dropped out of asteroids and only give you XP, progression has been overhauled entirely, but not exactly polished. New mechanics involving the Ancient Fabricator, how much you could build on your walker and how you place it on there, etc. I put out a video covering all the major changes. If something has been adjusted since then, it'll likely be covered here. So kicking off with Cradle. Cradle's pretty much how we remember it in Season 5, but again, if you haven't played since Season 4 or earlier, you're not going to recognize it. It's more of the same, a place to learn the ropes, and the closer to the center you go, the larger and more difficult the reboot camps get. The center camps even having scatter shot and stuff to shoot you with. If you scale the mountain in the center, that's where you're going to get the most loot and XP. The most important loot, I should say, such as components. And these said components are used to make modules, like lumberjack, forager, stuff that's pretty vital to make the grind less grindy. This is where that new mechanic for the Ancient Fabricator comes into play. There's the structures scattered all over the tile, they randomly spawn, and you take said components, go to them, plop them in, craft whatever modules you need, be on your way. From the moment you start your first module to craft, you have 15 minutes remaining to craft whatever modules you need before the whole thing disappears. Once you start, smokestack plumes up, and everybody's going to know where you are if they're nearby. This brings in that dynamic of what tabs and frags used to do. But now it's for modules to make your walker better and make your life easier. Still equally something to be contested. It's only a good mechanic if the components actually spawn. We'll get into that later. Otherwise, Cradle's just fine. I think they did great with it. It's a good start tutorial area to get you into the motion of things before you go deep into the canyons. Asteroids do still spawn on Cradle. However, you are unable to get meteor cores, which are vital to zero walkers and raid them. We will discuss the topic of raiding and zeroing walkers later. That's a whole nother can of worms. That being said, I highly recommend farming these asteroids as much as possible early on because you will be progression blocked by obsidian after a certain point. You need to be able to craft a lathe, which is needed for anything ceramic. That being said, there are two things of main focus while you're on Cradle: the mountain and asteroids. Don't pay attention to anything else. I mean, if the event point of interest pops up on tile, great, go for it if you want. But hyper-focus obsidian and center of the map. Focus on leveling, because it's a grind. You want to get as much as that as early on as possible so you're not doing as much grinding and farming later. Believe me, those modules will be needed. So, once you've reached level 15, which I recommend you lingering on Cradle until you've hit that mark or close to, we move on to canyons. This tile rolls out a day after Cradle. Initially was intended to be 2 days after Cradle, but people got too bored, and we know what happens with the last Oasis community when they get bored. They become the worst version of themselves, for sure. Can't fault them for that. When you've got nothing else to do, what else do you do other than PvP? It's just, maybe have some PvP etiquette, guys. I don't know. Or some self-respect. This is kind of where I would talk about player behavior and the mitigation of that, but that is also another topic that we will touch base on later in the video. Alongside medium or canyon tiles, depending on what you call it, ancient city map tiles will roll out as event maps. They usually last about 2 hours, and they pop up around peak times, a couple times in the morning, a couple times in the evening. It's usually peak times when they roll out event maps. At this stage, the wipe feels great. There's a good variety of point of interests and things for us to loot, from the congested camps and the islands on the map and the towers in the boneyard. Not just Rupu towers, but these big stone ones that you can scale and get a bunch of components from. Remember these. I will be bringing them up again. You have your typical mobs to farm, and this is when everyone starts getting a Leto, a Mollusk, or a Boggin, First week of the wipe is generally good. Progression doesn't feel too grindy until you get close to the next stage of levels, closer to 30. At this stage of the wipe, again, focus on the center of the map. That's where all the good stuff is. If you need basic mats, run the islands. Dip down into the ravines, get the basic mats, but hyper focus on the center. That's where all the good stuff is. You need components for modules, believe me. Especially if you're a solo or a casual, you need that leverage to farm. I didn't have a lumberjack module, and it took me a couple days to farm enough mats to make a buffalo. Keep in mind that's because I did not have farming modules equipped to a walker, because I was just unable to farm such components at that point because I was already on Volcanian. And why was that an issue? Well, let's talk about Volcanians. This is where progression got a bit goofy and was clear the devs had a bit of oversight. That being said, the community mods have come in clutch in the official server. This is the stage Sleeping Giant event map spawn, our means of getting clay, which we can't unpack things on the event map. You can kind of work around it if you get mats to build an excavator there, but kind of technically not supposed to. So we have what is called the Artisan Auger, and it's such a blessing. It's so good for solos and small groups, casuals. It makes it viable for us to get the important mats that we need. Does that make sense, Donkey Crew? Because it sure didn't seem like it when you rolled out Spires. But back to Volcanians. It took a moment for Volcanians to kinda feel good. It was getting there, but not quite what it needs to be. It took them a day or two to actually get the Papok to spawn, the giant frog. And then later on they rolled out insects to spawn down in the lakes along with brine. This made it easier for the casuals and smaller groups to be able to farm things like salt, which is needed for leather, or chitin, which is needed for walker upgrades, better tools, and gear. Kind of important. So thankfully, they made the necessary material available to us on the static map. What a concept. Towards the end of the cycle of Volcanian, like actually a day before they rolled out Spires pretty much, they introduced spawnings of erupting little tiny volcanoes in the calderas, which burst out giant chunks of obsidian. And this makes it a whole lot easier for that obsidian grind. You heard me mention a lathe earlier, of which requires obsidian. That is needed to make ceramic tools. I forget how much obsidian it needed, like 20 or 40, something like that, and the siler needs 200. That's a lot of obsidian. Thankfully, with the volcanoes erupting in the caldera, that's actually viable now. Before, you had to farm all your obsidian from the asteroids. Huh. Good luck with that, especially with how sweaty all the groups are. Constantly contested. I had some chill players I ran into that were pretty funny and chill to interact with, so it's not all bad, but, give us options. And they did. I'm harping on this a lot for a reason. You'll see when I get to talking about Spires. And if you did play the test, you probably already know what I'm getting at. So you remember how I said, remember those stone towers from the boneyard in the center of canyons? Yeah. Why are they not in the caldera available for us to loot for components? Because otherwise, there's dick all on Volcanians for us to farm for components and schematics and rigs, other than the Shaman Tower, which is something that's constantly contested by big groups. Is it that hard to spawn a couple stone towers for us to scale to get some decent loot for us solos and casuals? This is where the game starts being more oriented towards bigger group play than casuals and solos. I'm not saying it needs to cater to one side or the other. There just needs to be some balance to make it available for us casuals and solos who have normal lives and jobs and can't full-time your game. Genuinely, you have so much room in the caldera. Spawn the stone towers there. Give us more means of getting components. More to do in general, let's be honest. And now, we're on to Spires. This stage is rough, both in polish and difficulty. This stage demands the most attention. At the very least, iron is harvestable on the static map. which is a very valuable resource at endgame and necessary for us to have any sort of fighting edge that's viable to attack other players in endgame, right? Because that's the next stage. We're done with ceramic, we've moved on to iron and Iberian, right? However, the advanced furnace, of which you need to cook iron, requires hollowed bone, of which you only obtain from Koa, which requires a saw blade attached to your walker to farm. And the Koa only spawns on the Asteroid Iron event map tile. You seeing where the issue lies? Because now, endgame progression is locked behind big group gameplay and large creatures. There is a resource only obtainable from the Go-Go. Now, that sort of stuff, sure, I'm okay with. Make a resource dedicated to these big creatures. Sure, you want to explain to me how you guys managed to figure it out for every other stage of progression. Make the stuff you need to make crafting stations available on a static map. Very simple concept, and yet you guys managed to progression lock us with an event map that requires a special tool that's going to be heavily contested by huge groups? Why is the Koa not spawned on the static map? It doesn't need to go to an event map. That is absurd. Spawn the Koa on the Spire, make Hollowbone accessible to us to make an advanced furnace. It's not that hard. Don't just progression lock us with an event map. You just completely killed it for every casual and every solo, every small group. Now none of us can enjoy the endgame. That being said, you can technically enjoy endgame if you're okay with running subpar gear and just nothing but ceramic. You could potentially get iron gear as loot from the Spires and the Rupo and whatnot, but too bad the loot pool cycles are absolute trash in there, especially for the crates. You mind explaining to me why a breakable crate is spawning wood and fiber and sandals for me, the tier 1 gear, and I'm at endgame? And this was after they put out a hotfix to fix their loot pools. You didn't fix shit, bud. It's still garbage. I mean, I'll give you that I got an iron hammer off of Harupu. That's it. Why was I still getting fiber sandals out of crates? Fix the loot pools of the crates. It kind of worked it out better on the Rupu, but yeah, it took one step forward and then stopped. So with that being the case, you now have removed incentive for me to progress. Not only in the sense of gear, but leveling. I'm level 45. I just hit level 45. And I've been playing almost every day. I'm not hitting level 60. It's just not going to happen. Not with a week left. I know a lot of casual players have commented and chimed up in chat saying they've only reached level 30. It's not viable for the average Joe. Your game is made for neets who can full-time your game. That's not a viable business model for a video game. Especially if you're trying to make an MMO, but I mean, there's this whole new stage of progression requiring iron and Iberian and such, and we have to spend the last 2 weeks of the wipe cycle grinding levels, hoping we can eventually make it to that tier, and then hoping I can fly the Raptor finally at level 60 and enjoy it for a day at best. Yeah, no. You need to make leveling better. On the topic of leveling, remove attribute points. There should be no reason why I should be able to, because I played more hours and leveled up faster, have more damage, health, stamina, and mobility just because I have nothing better to do with my fucking time. No, if you want it to be accessible and actually skill-based, like you advertised when you dropped the season test, then you would actually make it skill-based. Remove attributes, make the worm tonic give us a buff for a duration, bada bing, bada boom, you've got a skill-based game that doesn't have an unfair advantage for people who are unemployed. As much as I love this game, and contrary to what this video make you think, I do love this game. It has the most interesting concept for an open world MMO survival that has directional combat, and it's one of a kind. I've yet to find anything comparable to this game. It's probably why I'm so passionate and angry. As a solo, or even if you're just casually playing with some friends or in a small group, it's a chore to play the game. It becomes a full-time job. That much hasn't changed. There isn't a single person out there who is employed that can justify putting that many hours into it unless they're a streamer. Keep in mind, I was streaming it and played about 3 to 6 hours a night, and I still struggled keeping up. That's not good progression. Now, I did say I would talk about zeroing walkers and player behavior. When it comes to zeroing, there's a huge stigma, and that is pretty much the fear of losing your walker, and that is a completely justified fear. Now, I won't deny that zeroing a walker does bring in a good dynamic for PvP and makes it more interesting. That being said, a zeroed walker should not become a lawn ornament, because that is a lot of time and effort invested into it, especially considering all of the bitching I've made thus far, the fact it took me a couple days to get a buffalo, and then you're also investing components and high quality mats to get the walker better. Zeroing should be halfway a concept, and by that I mean, sure, allow zeroing of a walker. Let the big clans have their petty squabbles and take out their valuable assets. However, I think those walkers should still be redeemable. Who in this community actually uses a repair hoist to repair their walker? If you do, you're a fool. Use repair hammers. However, maybe use the repair hoist to fix zeroed walkers. Boom. Problem solved. I feel like that's an incredibly simple thing to do. You could always just go get another walker with a harpoon, drag it back to your base, or bring a battling out, plop down your base with a repair hoist right there where it died, and fix your walker beyond your way. Or even, well, no, they should not allow us to pack up a zeroed walker, I will say that. Because then it brings the opportunity, and a lot of people are going to have issue with this, but it brings the opportunity for the clan to come back and contest them. That's why I said maybe they should be able to harpoon it and drag it back to trade or something, or lobby said walker and then bring it back onto the tile and drag it somewhere. But that kind of leads me into player behavior and mitigation of such behavior. I will say that even though there is fear of getting your walker zeroed, I never got anything zeroed. I got cracked into, but 99% of the time, it's not worth zeroing someone's walker. Not worth the mats, the time, or the effort unless they're being incredibly petty. And I am aware there are those people who exist, especially in this community. Thus my suggestion for mitigating zeroing of walkers but still making it hurt, but not a complete loss. Moving on, there is a small minority, I feel like at this point, but still enough of a chunk of people who don't want to play the game due to the toxicity, if you want to call it that. I haven't ran into really anything toxic, I just ran into the usual shitters, nothing big. Toxic and toxicity, that word gets thrown around way too much. The first step of mitigation is your own actions. Sure, there could and should be some mechanics implemented into the game to help mitigate these things, like what the trade station is currently, like what I suggested for repairing a zeroed walker, so on and so forth. But your actions are the utmost thing that will prevent any sort of ratting. So if you're in a situation where you can't pack up your base because some rat is there hitting your base, canceling it out, how's that rat able to get there? They're wingsuiting, right? They're grappling, right? Why did you put your base in the middle of a forest? Why would you put your base down in a canyon if you're worried about rats? Don't put yourself in that situation if you don't want to be in that situation, Mitigation starts with you. That being said, it seems to be the hostility and player interaction is solely over in every other region except for NA West. So if you want chill gameplay, you know where to go. Unless they make the changes I've suggested thus far and somehow manage to polish up the progression on the latter half of the wipe, I don't think this game's viable for solos, casuals, or small groups. I mean, I think at best, you'd be good with 3, ideally 4 people. So unless they polish up the progression to actually make the game feel more accessible, remove attribute points, remove the ability to completely lose a walker, but still have repercussions of getting zeroed, like I had mentioned, the game's gonna fail. It is going to fail. I hate saying that, but unless they make those changes, it is not going to be a viable game to survive, no matter how much passion you have. So, with that said, I'll see what they have in store for us when the full season rolls out. Hopefully those changes are implemented. Hopefully they take those into consideration. But I have my doubts. Time will tell. If the game goes in a better direction, you'll see more content. Otherwise, you may just see it fully die off after this. I hope that's not the case. On that terrible disappointment, I will see you guys in the next video, hopefully with some more positive news with The Last Oasis. Otherwise, it'll just be videos revolving other video games and such. Appreciate you. See you next time.